Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Divorce Coaching Podcast with myself, Tom Nash, Mr. Divorce Coach, and my illustrious colleague, Fay I from Feel Positive Coaching. Hello, Fay.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Jeetesh.
So Fay asked me not to, but she might not be speaking a lot today because she's not very well. It's not COVID, don't worry. We also have another really exciting guest for you today. We seem to be going on a bit of a run at the moment, a bit of a series, don't we, Fay, in terms of dispelling myths of divorce. We've got a very good, a really lovely sister with us today. I've had the pleasure to know for quite some time now, with Jeetesh Patel from Laurus Law.co.uk. What is it you said to me earlier about if you can't remember how to say it, think of it with Laurus but with the L at the start. Laurus Law.
Yes, that's right.
We're going to be talking about parental alienation today, what it is, what it isn't, dispelling some myths, talking about some figures and facts and things like that, and getting a bit of an insight. But Jeetesh, we'd like to introduce yourself to the world because you are a specialist family lawyer. This is one area of expertise, but you also have some other areas as well that you work with.
That's right, Tom. Thank you, Tom and Faye, for inviting me to do this podcast with you. So I'm a family law solicitor at Laurus Law. I've been a solicitor purely in family for the last 20 years or so, and that's all I've done in my practice. I tend to specialise in cases concerning children, quite complicated cases concerning children, but I also have a specialism in international surrogacy work and international adoption work as well.
Awesome, because we were talking about that as well, about the adoption process as well. But I know a couple of the surrogacy lawyers and adoption lawyers, a handful, and it sounds like a really nice side of the family law to work on. Kind of positive stories, as well. But no, obviously we're here today talking about parental alienation, and I suppose in the first instance, how would you, from a legal perspective, how do you describe parental alienation for if someone's never heard the term or it's quite new to them? It does get used quite a lot, potentially too much. We'll get into that discussion in a moment. But how would you describe parental alienation from a client's perspective, what you witness or when people come to you saying, I think I'm experiencing alienation?
So what I tend to do is when they first come to see me or speak with me, is just identify my own from what they're saying to me, any signs of parental alienation coming across. Some parents will say, my child is being alienated against me. Some parents don't use that phrase, but actually describe the signs of parental alienation as well. And some may not have even have heard of parental alienation. But what I do say to people is that parental alienation is a situation where a child shows resistance or hostility towards one parent, which is not justified and has happened because of psychological manipulation. That's key. That is happened because of psychological manipulation by the other parent. So for example, a child, you may be seeing your child on Saturday morning at 10 a.m, for example. At 8 a.m, you get loads of text messages from the other parents saying they really don't want to come and see you. They're very reluctant to come and see you. I can't force them to come and see you, and making excuses. But when the child eventually does come to stay with you, the child is absolutely natural with you. There is no concerns with the child at all. The child is having a fantastic time with you as well. So it's only when the child returns back to the other parent that they may then once again demonstrate a reluctance to come and see you again. And that is the psychological manipulation or an allegation of psychological manipulation against that parent, which then becomes parental alienation.
Because I noticed, I do a lot of reading research around this sort of stuff anyway, previously, as well as recently, and there was, from what I was reading in, I can't remember if it was a Psychology Today or a US Psychology document I was reading. I need to remember which one it was. I'll share it when I find it. And it was describing about the kind of three different, let's say, tiers or types of parental alienation. You have kind of a mild, which was described as mild, which is, as you say, that there's a resistance from the child. Or one parent is saying that there's a resistance from the child to visit the other parent. and in this study, it did say typically by, and I think it was an American paper because they used the word custodial parent. That's why I think it was a US document. But it said once a child is actually with the other parent, they're actually quite happy, quite normal, quite natural, actually, as you said. That tends to be kind of described as mild, and then there was more of a moderate, so more of a stronger resistance, and particularly by the child, and also then maintains some of the resentment towards the other parent when they are with them. And then there was a level of severe, or severity, quite severe, where it said that there was basically won't see the other parent at all, flatly refuses, and this is the child flatly refusing. They speak ill of the other parent. If they do go or forced to go, that they run away or they hide, or so it kind of had those three different tiers. From a legal perspective, because that's your area of specialism, the last 20 plus years, how are these looked at and governed by the courts to decide what's really going on, and is there really an experience of PA, and if there is it mild, is it moderate, is it severe? How does that get viewed by the courts?
I think from the court's point of view, they have to have somebody independent assessing the allegation of parental alienation. And that tends to be CAFCAS, the court welfare officers who do that. It can be in severe cases, the social worker, the social worker for your local authority as well, that can address that allegation of parental alienation. What the courts tend to do here, and I have quite a few of these cases at the moment, is if one parent raises the allegation of parental alienation, the other parent denies that allegation, then the court has to make a decision on who's right and who's wrong. So they set it down for what's called a fact-finding hearing, where you would give evidence as to what you believe to be parental alienation. The other party has an opportunity of saying why it isn't parental alienation, and then the court decides if it has taken place or if it hasn't taken place. Now, family law, well, the children proceedings are governed by the Children Act 1989, and it's all about what's in the child's best interest. So the court's primary concern is the paramountcy, is the welfare of the child in question. And the idea is to demonstrate to the court that the impact of parental alienation is having an adverse impact on that child's welfare, basically.
I wanted to ask Jeetesh, I'm going to be really happy if I get through this podcast without coughing, but just we're talking about the fact-finding hearing. Do the children have a voice in that, or is it solely the parents? Is it dependent on age, maybe, of the child, or?
It's dependent on the age of the child in some cases. So under the Children Act, children's wishes and feelings are taken into account. And sometimes the court will ask a CAFCAS officer to address allegations of parental alienation, but also address the wishes and feelings of the child. Now, I always say to a father or a mother, a child's wishes and feelings are taken into account when they're approximately 12 or older, basically. But equally, to get the child's voice into the court can appoint what's called a children's guardian. So the children don't actually say anything to the court or to the judge. It's the guardian who works with the children and is their voice in the court arena. So in some complex parental alienation cases, the court have appointed a children's guardian to be the child's voice in the court.
So just from a perspective of, let's take the severe, the worst potential example, where the child is saying, I don't want to see them, don't think to do with them, they speak ill of the other parent, mum or dad, whatever it might be, etc. And if it has been, as you say, from the original definition, in terms of impairing psychological damage to the child and creating that thought process for them, because just getting back to that definition about psychology, that the child is taught, or children are taught this point of view, they're not born with the fact of I don't like mum or I don't like dad. That's something that has been ingrained and taught to them. So in a situation where you've got a child that has been exposed to, let's say, severe level of PA, how does the court then take that into account of hearing the child's thoughts and feelings if the thoughts and feelings of a child in a severe situation have effectively that map of the world or that view or that opinion of the other parent has been impaired? Because surely their thoughts and feelings are going to be, well, I don't want to see mum or dad, or I think they're this and that. And so how does that get going? Because that must be really difficult to manage.
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult to manage. The guardians are trained on issues of parental alienation and how to spot parental alienation as well. But equally, you're right, Tom, that a child could turn around and say, well, I just don't want to see mum, or I don't want to see dad. It's nothing to do with the parent I'm living with. It's my own wish and feeling not to see that parent. In those kinds of cases, if that isn't accepted, and or the CAFCAS officer or the guardian hasn't really addressed the issue of psychological manipulation either, the court can, on an application, appoint a psychologist to address the issue and look at it not from a legal or welfare point of view, but from a psychological point of view instead.
Yeah.
And that would be evidence then that is before the court as well.
Go on, Fay, I know you have more questions.
I mean, listening, it just sounds such a kind of complex thing to have to deal with, and then taking into account feelings of everyone and what could go wrong. It's got to be handled, I imagine, in a very sensitive but also professional and ethical way. And I kind of wanted to ask you, Jeetesh, really, if someone is thinking about I've got this feeling, this incongruence in me that something is not right. I mean, if someone's got a feeling that this is what's going on and this isn't right, my child doesn't want to see me, and I think this is because of parental alienation, what would they need to do? What would you suggest that they do?
I think the people who come to see me and say my child's being alienated against me, I can't take that at its face value. I mean, I think they have to demonstrate to me, even before we're writing to the other side or even going to court, demonstrate to me how they've concluded that the child has been alienated. And it's to do with the child's behavior towards them. So as I was saying, if the child is having a great time with you when you're alone with the child, but then goes back home to I put it in speech marks, main parent, and then shows reluctance to come back to you the next weekend or the alternate weekend, those are signs that people can see that something at home is happening, creating that reluctance for the child to come to see me, because when the child is with me, the child is fine and enjoying their time with me, basically. So it's picking up those telltale signs. One of the other key signs is where the child is overtly negative towards you. For example, oh, at mummy or daddy's house, we do this way, you do it that way, your way is wrong, that kind of thing. Because a child has been told that at home, again in speech marks, this is the right way to do something. If you're doing it in another way, it's wrong. So that is a form of psychological manipulation as well. What I say to people is just keep a diary, basically. And just note down any observations that you have, any difference in the child's attitude towards you as well. In this day and age, there's social media, children are corresponding with their parent that they may not live with via social media as well. Has there been a reluctance to do that, or has that automatically stopped now? Although they may see you face to face on a pattern, have they stopped interacting with you in the week via WhatsApp, for example, or text messages to you? Or is there a reluctance to speak to you on the telephone as well? And it's just picking up those signs. And I also say, if you see those signs, don't come to me to raise the allegation that my child's being alienated. Speak to your child about it, or try to speak to your child about it initially, to say what's going on. Your behavior towards me has changed. We're not speaking as much as we were. You're not WhatsApping me as much as you were before. is there something wrong? Can I help? It's that kind of thing that I would encourage people to do.
That's really good advice, like saying, going and asking your child. Yes, it might feel difficult. Yes, it might feel as if maybe I don't need to do this, but actually getting their words and how they feel seems really, really important. I love that, Jesus, actually getting the client to do that before you go any further.
Further than that, yeah, because when you run with the allegation and it's an unfounded allegation, then you're just damaging the relationship, not only with the child, but also with the other parent as well, aren't you? Even though it's damaged already, it's just making it 100 times worse as well.
Absolutely. I mean, do you find that when it is founded, when let's say that they've had that conversation, tried to have that conversation with the child, and it's progressed as well, and then they have come to you from a legal perspective, do you find that accusations of parental alienation, do they typically, is there usually like an experience or a background? Is it always to do with high conflict situations, or is it linked to other experiences, and that's where it only stems from, do you think?
So I've seen it in various ways. Some has been very subtle to start with, and then has gradually progressed and progressed and progressed. Some, very sadly, actually, I've also seen it where it's done to one sibling, but not to the other sibling.
Yeah. And
then that sibling distances themselves from the parent, and then the other sibling feels guilty about seeing the other parent, and that's another kind of form of alienation in my
so then you've actually got sibling alienation because the siblings are misaligned as well.
Yes, exactly. So, and then there's divided loyalty issues, that kind of thing as well. And why did you go and see daddy or mummy? And you know, and it just creates more acrimony than it's actually worth. But I give you an example of a case I'm currently doing. Now, they separated in January of this year. And straight away, without lawyers or anyone getting involved, they agreed a pattern of contact. And so I'm representing the father. They agreed a pattern of contact with my client, which was literally during school holidays. It was Friday to Sunday, Friday to Monday morning back at school. And then school holidays were divided equally as well between them. Then something happened around about June time. It involved the police, and the mother then turned around and said, the child, who's only 7 as well, the child doesn't want to see you anymore. And that was the point we had to take it to court because we had no choice. Up until, so for about 6-7 months after separation, whilst divorce papers were going on, we're talking about money, everything was smooth sailing in terms of the contact, the arrangements with the child, but something happened in June that upset the mother, and she then turned around and said, the child doesn't no longer want to see you. So we've had to take that to court, and that has been listed for a fact-finding hearing. Sadly, he can't have contact until after that fact-finding hearing, and that fact-finding hearing, given the court system, is not until February next year. So the concern is how far the child could have been alienated between now and that fact-finding hearing going forward. So that seems like a punishment to the father. Not that I'm being sexist, it's just because I'm acting for the father in that case. But it looks like the mother was annoyed about whatever had happened in June. He has one version, she has another version, but she's annoyed about his version, and she's using the child to punish him by saying the child doesn't want to see you, despite 6 or 7 months of good quality contact since separation.
I think that's a really good point, actually, because when you say, you use the perfect word, subtle, no one, in my experience, I mean, there are obviously ones of it, but very, very rarely, I should say, with a caveat, that someone specifically goes out there with the, I'm going to alienate my kids from the parent. It does tend to be a kind of, under the radar. I didn't even, a lot of the times, even for the alienator, I've had clients I worked with where actually they have been effectively would be deemed as the alienator, and actually they didn't realise what they were doing actually was a build up, and it's a slow progressing that they didn't even notice they were working towards, and now it's become all about this stuff, or their approach, their feelings towards the other one, and actually it goes back to the old phrase that people always use about the children being pawns or children in the middle, and actually it's about your stuff as the adults, and where you're then projecting that, but it starts off very low and very subtle, not as obvious. So it's, again, in terms of signs, it can be quite difficult to witness quite quickly. I have a bit of a saying that, and I'm all for them typically because all of my social medias, but when it comes to whether it's co-parenting, parallel parenting, even counter-parenting, unfortunately, I will always say, when it comes to your separation when you have children, there's no place for pronouns. I'm all for pronouns in every way, shape or form, but when it comes to divorcing and separating the children, there's no place for pronouns. If you used to refer to the other parent as mum, mummy, dad, daddy, continue to do so. When you start to use language, him, he, she, her, it becomes subtly undertoned and mildly demeaning, especially when you're then kind of linking it, and I'm a bit of a language lover, so when you start to, no word of a lie, I did witness someone once, I witnessed this with someone once, where actually we're talking to their child, and they used a pronoun to describe the other parent, where there's not a very good adult relationship, should we say, or connection in any way, shape or form, but the use of pronouns, you could see that actually within the child that they took on that guilt. They then felt they couldn't then speak about mummy or daddy in a positive way. They too then had to take that on from their parent and refer to that parent as him or her. And you could see the face, and they look at the floor, and it's the tone changes and the body language, and it's those type of things, I think, subtly that can build up to it. I had a question from a legal perspective when it does get quite bad, and it's quite obvious, because you've mentioned about a client at the moment. Now, this was something I'd never heard of when, fortunately, I didn't need to know about it when I was going through my divorce, but it has something that I have learned more about, unfortunately, for some clients in recent times. Now, what is a prohibited steps order, and is it something that could be utilised in a positive way if you have got a situation of true parental alienation?
So a prohibited steps order is basically a court order that prevents the other parent from doing certain things in relation to the child itself. Mainly used for, I would say, for things such as travel, for example. If there's a threat that the child is being taken out of the country and you don't know about, or you have a suspicion about it, and you've spoken to them, they're denying it, but you've seen plane tickets, or the child has mentioned something to you about it, then that prohibited steps order can stop that parent from traveling abroad with the child, basically. It can be used also for removing the child from your care and control as well, or from the school, for example, as well. So those are cases where a child may have been removed unlawfully for whatever reasons, and you want the added protection going into the future that that behaviour isn't repeated. So you'd apply for a prohibited steps order preventing the other parent removing the child from your care and control from their school, or somebody you have left the child in the care of as well. For parental alienation, once upon a time it was used for that. You know, I am prohibiting you from alienating me against my children. However, although the law hasn't changed, the court's interpretation of the law has changed now. And now the court's approach to parental alienation cases is to have that fact-finding hearing and to make a decision as to if parental alienation has taken place or not. Now, in some cases, recent cases as well, the court has said that, or the court has said, yes, parental alienation has taken place in this case, and they've shifted the child's residence from their, and again in speech marks, main parent back to the parent who has actually been alienated. And that is one of the drastic things that the court have recently started doing in very severe parental alienation cases.
Unfortunately, I've had some experiences, not me personally, but client-wise, where they've unfortunately had to take that route to stop people moving, because actually people moving to the opposite end of the country or whatever it might be, moving away, and then trying to, I think one of the hardest things is because then when you're trying to re-establish, and then the example of your client you just mentioned till February, that timeline to then re-establish contact thereafter, and again taking into account the psychological impacts to the child depending on their ages and their individual needs, can be huge and everlasting. So no, it's just it's something that I was made aware of a couple of years ago, and I've unfortunately noticed it in a few experiences since, of having to try and put something in place to stop it going even further. We're already starting to experience some detachment of connection, and that I've witnessed a few people that have had to utilise that particular order, prohibited steps order, to try and impose a situation where actually it can, let's say, mitigate the risk of it getting any worse. However, what happens if someone does breach that? Let's say someone goes, no, actually, I'm not going to go by the order, and I am going to move. I'm going to take the kids, and they just disappear. What happens then?
So if they do disappear, that's a different area. So that would be, and you've had the prohibited steps order in place, that would be a child abduction, basically. And police get involved in those, and the High Court get involved if the country they've gone to is part of the Hague Convention as well. But in the country, let's say somebody breaches a prohibited steps order by removing a child from your care and control when you prohibited them from doing so, yes, you can enforce that prohibited steps order against them. Again, it does require a separate court application to enforce it, but the person can be fined and can, because it's a court order, can be committed to prison as well as a consequence of that breach.
Well, not going too far, because I don't want people going out there and doing this, but I suppose that it's about bringing people back the other way to maybe recognise, like you said, some of those signs that you were talking about earlier as well. And again, I know, Faye, you had some questions that you wanted to put to him, so I'll be quiet for a minute.
That's all right. I'm happily just listening to all this and learning as well. We always learn so much on these podcasts, and I suppose I kind of want to jump in with the gender question, Jeetesh, really. Is this generally more men or women that will suffer from it, and why do you think that is? What is your experience of whether it's men or women that suffer?
I think I'm quite neutral, to be honest, just from my own experience. I have female clients, mums who aren't seeing their children and are raising allegations of alienation. But equally, I have mothers who have been accused of alienation and are trying to exonerate themselves from that. Likewise with fathers, I tend to find that fathers are the ones who will give it the name parental alienation more than mothers would. But equally, again, fathers saying, my child's been alienated against me, or have been accused of parental alienation as well.
That's really interesting that you say that it's kind of quite equal. And I kind of want to then jump in with a kind of a grey area. What happens if you're dealing with a parental alienation case, but there's also abuse thrown in? What happens there?
So at that fact-finding hearing, one of the facts you're asking the court to find is, has there been parental alienation by the other parent? So the other fact you would want the court to find is that abuse has taken place, which is impacting on the child's relationship with a parent as well.
So, I'm guessing this fact-finding kind of hearing is really in-depth. And really
it's very
involved.
in-depth. It's very involved. It's very emotional for everyone concerned. And it is a lot of he said, she said as well, because we're in court and it has to be based on evidence. Sometimes you have police records for abuse. Sometimes you would have doctors' reports for abuse as well. But sometimes it goes to the credibility, and that's the only way a judge can make a decision, is who do they believe the most? Do they believe the mother most, or do they believe the father most? Because there isn't any other compelling evidence to base it on, basically. So yeah, it's quite intense, actually. So
really fascinating. And I was kind of thinking, you know, I've had clients in my coaching room that subconsciously done it, and when I've kind of put them to it, you know, because when you're hurting, you're healing, you know, sometimes you do things, and when you take that step and think, oh my gosh, they have been horrified, and sometimes I imagine, Tom, you've been the same. It's kind of our role to kind of say, well, yes, you're hurting, yes, you're healing, but do the children have to suffer before it gets to the clients that you're dealing with, where maybe it's got out of hand?
And
I mean, I never knew the phrase years ago, and from doing a bit of research, I found out that the phrase was first coined by a psychologist in 1985, I think it was. So, how much? I mean, you've been in the family law industry for, as you say, 20 plus years, Jeetesh. How have you seen that shift, and has it been a positive shift for recognizing it, managing it, and assisting clients through it? Has that improved, or do you feel it's got worsened? Bit of an opinion poll here, so I'm not trying to put you in hot water.
I think at the start of my career, I never heard of it, to be honest with you. So even when I had to do my exams for the Law Society Children Panel, it wasn't an issue that we had to cover or address or have even had experience of. I mean, that was a long time ago. But now things are changing. They have been, and I think things are changing in the legal profession around this issue, because the legal profession has had to accept that this is an issue, and that has been because of the general public raising it in social media forums or criticizing the court system for not being able to address it. And there's been more psychological research done around the impact of parental alienation, which has come to the forefront as well. So the law, or the family law, has had to adapt to the to what society is actually looking for as well. And now the judges have specialist training around the issue as well, which is brilliant, because years ago you would never have that. They have specialist training around the issue. There are reported cases where practitioners like myself are given like a guidance that if you have a similar case, follow this procedure as well. CAFCAS, the court's welfare officers, are specialist CAFCAS officers dealing with cases of parental alienation, and have useful resources and guidance on their website as well. So it's come to the forefront, I would say, in the last few years. It hasn't been around, although it has been around, obviously, as an issue. It hasn't been like mainstream in the court system, and I would say since the last few years or so, to be honest.
I mean, that's great that everyone's getting the training they need. And the kind of question I want to ask as well is, I'm kind of fascinated to know, so once you've been through the court process and it has been proven in the court of law that one parent is parental alienating the other, what happens then? What are the steps taken to rectify what's gone on?
So the court at that point has quite a lot of or wide powers available to it. The court can say that the family engage in family therapy, for example, or what's a new form of mediation that's called child-centered mediation as well. That obviously requires both parents to voluntarily agree to that process. If the court feels that, okay, I've made a finding of parental alienation, but I don't think the alienating parent is going to take heed of that or listen to that, they can shift the residence of the child to the other parent. So the court does have quite wide and can make quite drastic, life-changing decisions as well for a child.
I mean, that's amazing that the court can actually say, well, the child can now go and live with the other parent. And kind of thinking on the back of that, you know, if there has been kind of psychological, emotional damage to the child, you know, does the child get to see a therapist or a counsellor or?
Yeah, there's always ongoing support for a child. Sadly, the court wouldn't provide that, because the court will just say, okay, we've done our bit, as it were, and we're closing your case now, over to you guys. So it's down to the parent concerned. And obviously, where you've had a finding of parental alienation, that child needs a lot of support. And there are great child therapists around, great counsellors around. Schools now do have counsellors trained to deal with the issue as well. So I think it's the parents' responsibility to provide this kind of support for the child going into the future, even if their court case has come to an end. Yeah. There are some cases where, for example, if your local authority has been involved in the court case, they may carry on ongoing support for the child as well, and monitoring the situation as well. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, no, that was a really good point, actually, because it was reminding me of a program I watched recently, which I won't mention, but a particular documentary. And that was one of the things that really struck me, was about once the process, let's say that example, that real severe and major step for a court to take about changing the residency, but actually if that's then been weeks, months, more than likely years, the child's slightly older as well, that actually they're not going to want to go, and actually that then cause some, like you say, so a lot more problems for both the parents and the child, and it doesn't necessarily, let's say, I suppose, help fix the problem, if you like, because actually it can make things harder. But by the same token, what do you do if you then also got a parent that hasn't seen the child for however long? So no, they're really interesting. I think the aftercare part, I suppose, is where I would kind of look to see if there was other resources and things that could be out.
Yeah.
So just on that, actually, what's advice, or I suppose what resources, or do you direct clients anywhere for particular resources, knowledge of information, to go and have a look about what it might be, what to do, what they can do outside of the court process? Is there anything that you're able to share with clients in terms of how they can go and get resources?
Yeah, I mean, I say to them that even if you just type in the words parental alienation into Google, a lot comes up in there. And there's subsections that people can be looking at as well. There is a lot of psychological research being undertaken on the issue if people wanted to read further into it, mainly to do with, number one, why it happens, and number two, the impact, which is the important thing, on the child, basically, and how to address that impact on the child. And that's done by Kent University, are doing quite a lot of research around the area as well. So it's a very topical issue at the moment. It's a very live issue in the court system. There are CAFCAS resources available that we can guide, if we're in the court system, a parent to. CAFCAS have a guide on their website on how they deal with parental alienation cases, on what they advise the parent making the allegation of parental alienation to do as well.
Okay. Well, I think you've answered all of my questions. Anything else from you, Faye?
I haven't. It's been absolutely amazing. I've learned so much, and I think it's so important that again it's talked about for people that are maybe thinking, is this what's going on? Am I doing it? Is my ex doing it? And what can we do about it? So it's been brilliant, as always.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for joining us today. Coming out on the YouTube and on the podcast. But we always say to all of our viewers, if you feel that this is something that you're being impacted by, on either side, maybe you're starting to recognize some things in yourself that maybe you need to change. A bit of self-reflection work, probably come talk to myself or Faye. If you feel that maybe you're on the other side of the fence and maybe more on the severe angles or aspects of this, please do get in touch. We can put you in contact with Jeetesh. If you have any questions, we always like to ask our audience, if they've got any questions or anything like that, please do add it in the comments. And we'll also get Jeetesh to answer those for you as well, and share all your contacts across social media. So no, thank you very much for coming to it. I know this is a bit of a taboo topic and it can be quite a difficult one, and people have different experiences and things like that. So no, but I think it's really useful just to help share that knowledge with people, and how we can help people. So thank you very much for your time. It is greatly appreciated. And that's it from me. But no, thank you very much for being here, and thanks for coming.